All right, our next exercise is 11-27, and your textbook calls this a product line profitability analysis. I've always referred to this type of a problem as a keep or drop. Are we going to keep the product line, or are we going to drop the product line? And so if we look here, we've got product T1 and T2. And it shows that our operating income from T2 is a negative $16,000. So they're talking about dropping that one because of the negative number there. And so the first question is, find the expected annual change in operating income by dropping T2 and only selling T1. And so what we're told is if we drop T2, the sales of T1 will increase by 10% next year. And so in this case, we have sales of 200,000 of T1, variable cost of 70,000 for cost of goods sold and 20,000 for selling and administrative, giving us a contribution margin of 110. We can start there. This is how I would do it again if I was presenting it to accountants. I would start with the 110,000 contribution margin times 1.1, so that's going to increase our sales or increase our contribution margin by 10%. And that will be $121,000. And remember, this is contribution margin. This isn't sales. The rest of our cost structure will stay the same on this. And so we have to do the total fixed cost, which will be the fixed corporate cost of 60 and T2 75. So that will be 135,000 in corporate fixed cost. And the fixed selling and administrative is 12 and 21 for a total of 33,000. And so when we do that, we get the 121 minus 135,000 minus the 33,000. That gives us a negative 47,000 by dropping the product line T2, whereas previously we had a 38,000 profit on T1 and a $16,000 loss, so a net of 22,000 positive income, operating income for the plant as a whole. So we go from a positive 22 to a negative 47. That is a $69,000 decrease in net income. And so that's something that we probably really don't want to do on that, right? Then part 2 says, by what percentage would sales from T1 have to increase in order to make up the financial loss from dropping T2? All right, so what it is, the way we go on this is we look at the combined contribution margin, right? So we've got so the first thing we have to do is get the contribution margin ratio on T1. And so our contribution margin is 110,000 and our sales was 200,000. That's going to be a contribution margin ratio of, should be 55%. Yeah, it is 55%. Okay, so now what we have to do is we take the combined contribution margin, so 110 for T1 and 80,000 for T2. Combine that gives us 190,000, and we divide that by the contribution margin ratio of 55% for T1, and so we get 190,000 divided by 0.55. We would have to increase our contribution margin to 345, 454.55. And if we divide that number by the 110,000, that means that would give us 3.14, but subtract the 1 for the sales that are already there. We would have to increase our sales by 214% in order to break even by dropping the T2 line. So that's how we do that. And then part 3 says, what is the required percentage increase in sales from T1 to compensate for the lost margin of T2 if total fixed costs can be reduced by 45,000? So, okay, now this gets into the concept of committed fixed costs and uncommitted fixed costs. So a committed fixed cost is something we cannot get out of. A uncommitted fixed cost or a avoidable fixed cost, that's the correct term. An avoidable fixed cost is something we can basically eliminate if we drop a product line. And probably the most obvious one of those would be a supervisor's salary. If we don't have the product line, we don't need a supervisor for that product line. So even though it's a fixed cost, we can eliminate that fixed cost. And so the simple way that we do that is we subtract that 45,000 from the contribution margin that we needed. So instead of 190, we only need 145,000 in contribution margin because we're not having to cover the contribution margin that we could avoid, the fixed costs that we could avoid. So we divide the 145 by 55% and plug that in. So we need 263,636.36. Again, we divide that by the current level of 110,000. Gives us 240%, 2.40. But remember, we can subtract the 1 that's already there. So we would still need an increase of 140% of sales to make the same profit, even if we can reduce our fixed cost by $45,000. So what strategic factors can we look at? Now, let me show you a quick way to do this problem is if we do it as a keep or drop exercise. And that is we go to the contribution margin, right? And as long as you have a positive contribution margin, you're thinking, it's not the final answer, but you're thinking, I will keep it, right? And then you look at, is the contribution margin greater than the avoidable fixed cost? So if I could eliminate 90,000, as you can see, the fixed costs that are allocated to product T2 is 96,000. If I could eliminate 90,000, I would actually be better off to drop this line because I make 80,000 in contribution margin, but I save 90,000 in fixed cost. So I'd be 10,000 better off. So what you really look at on these is my contribution margin greater than my avoidable fixed cost? Well, in this case, we had 80,000 versus 45,000 in part 3 that was avoidable. So yes, my contribution margin is greater than my avoidable fixed cost. So I should probably keep T2. Other factors that come into play, part of it was in part 1, is what is my lost sales to the other product? If I'm going to sell T1 and T2 and I keep 90% or so of my, if I just switch those sales, then I might be better off to do that, right? So whether I can keep the sales or not is an important factor. Another factor that becomes very important on this is complementary sales. One of the things that can happen, and I use the example because I remodel or used to remodel houses some on the side, not commercially, just buy a beat up house and then fix it up and live in it. And but when you fix the kitchen, right, you generally want all the appliances to be have the same kind of look, the same color or pattern or whatnot. And so let's say we make $80 a unit on refrigerators, $100 a unit on ranges, and but we lose $30 a unit on dishwashers. But the problem is, if I eliminate the whole dishwasher line, even if my analysis up front would be that I'm better off to get rid of dishwashers, how many sales of refrigerators and ranges would I lose because people want things to look the same? And that's known as complementary goods. When I buy one thing, I buy something else to go with it. And so that's an important concept to take into account as well. All right, so that actually wraps up exercise 11-27.